She hadn't slept in 3 days. Every morning, the walk to school felt like walking through a nightmare that wouldn't end. The threats weren't imaginary. The danger wasn't in her mind. It was real, closing in, step by step. And no one, no teacher, no officer, no adult was coming to help. A 7-year-old girl named Aisha Johnson had already learned something that most adults spend their lives trying to unlearn. Sometimes, the world doesn't protect the innocent. Sometimes you have to find your own angels. Riverton was the kind of small town that people described as peaceful. 2 traffic lights, 1 high school, a main street with an old diner and a grocery store. People smiled at each other at crosswalks. The mailman knew every name on his route. Nothing bad ever seemed to happen there, at least not where people could see it. Aisha lived with her mother, Tanya, in a modest 2-bedroom apartment on Oak Avenue. Tanya worked as a nurse at County General Hospital. Mostly night shifts, sometimes doubles. Life was hard but full of warmth. Every morning before her shift, Tanya braided her daughter's hair and packed her lunch. Every night, they read picture books under a dim lamp until one of them fell asleep mid-sentence. For years, their home had been small but safe. Then came October. It started with something so ordinary that no one noticed. Aisha was walking to her 2nd-grade classroom when 3 older boys blocked her path. Tyler Morrison, his cousin Jake, and their friend, Connor, 5th and 6th graders, bigger, louder, crueler. Tyler slapped Aisha's backpack off her shoulder, scattering her notebooks across the hall. Jake kicked them further away when she tried to pick them up. The other kids kept walking. Teachers stayed behind their doors. The boys laughed. "Look at the baby," Tyler sneered. "Going to cry? Going to run to mommy?" Aisha didn't cry. She just picked up her books with shaking hands and walked away. But the silence of everyone around her hurt more than their words. The next day, they took her lunch money. The day after, they shoved her into a locker. Within a week, Aisha had become their favorite target. They followed her in hallways, whispered things when teachers weren't looking. "Nobody likes you. You're ugly. Your mom's too poor to buy real clothes." Aisha started taking different routes through school to avoid them, but Riverton Elementary was small. There was nowhere to hide. By week 2, the bullying grew worse. In the cafeteria, Tyler tripped her while she carried her tray. Food splattered across her shirt. Laughter erupted all around. Aisha ran to the bathroom, locked herself inside, and cried silently until lunch was over. She stopped eating lunch after that. She would hide in the library instead, pretending to read while her stomach growled. Then came the following. After school, Jake would trail her home, 20 feet behind, just close enough for her to hear his footsteps. Sometimes Tyler came too. They'd laugh and shout things. "We know where you live. Better watch your back." Every time Aisha turned around, they'd smirk. That was when the nightmares began. She'd wake up screaming, tangled in sheets, trembling, unable to speak. Tanya would rush into her room, but Aisha couldn't explain. The fear was too big for words. She stopped playing with her toy animals, stopped drawing, stopped smiling. The little girl who once filled their apartment with laughter had become quiet, watchful, scared of her own shadow. Tanya noticed everything. The silence, the bruises, the hollow eyes. When she found her daughter one morning locked in the bathroom, crying, refusing to go to school, her heart broke. "Please, Mommy," Aisha sobbed. "Please, I can't go back. Please don't make me." Tanya held her until she stopped shaking. She promised she would fix it. That morning, Tanya marched into Jefferson Elementary, demanded to see the principal. She sat across from Principal Hicks and the school counselor, her voice trembling with fury as she listed everything, every bruise, every threat, every tear. But the principal leaned back in his chair, unimpressed. "Ms. Johnson," he said, "kids tease each other. It's part of growing up. We can't intervene in every little conflict." The counselor nodded sympathetically. "Aisha is a sensitive child," she said softly. "Perhaps she's misinterpreting playful teasing. Children need to develop thicker skin." Tanya's hands shook. "She's 7 years old," she snapped. "She's terrified. These boys are twice her size." But the principal held up his hand. "Let's not be dramatic. Boys will be boys." The words burned like acid. Tanya left the school in disbelief, tears stinging her eyes. The people who were supposed to protect her child had dismissed her. But the worst part? They had blamed her daughter. Still, Tanya refused to give up. That afternoon, she went to the police. Officer Davis, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, listened as she described everything. He nodded, took notes, and finally said, "I understand, ma'am. But legally speaking, there's not much we can do. Kids say mean things. They push and shove. It's not criminal." Tanya's voice cracked. "They're terrorizing her." The officer sighed. "If things escalate, if there's a real assault, call us. Until then, there's nothing we can file." Kids being kids. The same words again. The same dismissal. Tanya walked home feeling helpless. The system built to protect children had failed hers completely. But there was one thing she still didn't know, something darker hiding underneath it all. Because Tyler and Jake weren't acting alone. There was someone else, someone older watching. Aisha. The first time she saw the car, it was parked across the street from her school. A shiny black car with a football sticker on the back window. She didn't think much of it until she noticed it again and again. 3 days in a row. Each time it seemed to appear just as she was walking home. On the third day, the driver rolled down his window. He looked older, maybe a teenager, maybe a grown man. He smiled at her, but it wasn't a kind smile. "Better watch yourself," he said, and then drove off. That night, Aisha told her mother. Tanya froze. A car. A strange man. A threat. Her blood went cold. "Did you tell anyone?" Aisha nodded weakly. "The police said it's nothing." Tanya could barely breathe. She wanted to scream. She wanted to protect her child. But how do you protect a 7-year-old from a shadow? That night, Aisha couldn't sleep again. The image of that black car haunted her. She saw it every time she closed her eyes. Sometimes the man was inside it. Sometimes the bullies were. In her dreams, she ran and ran, but the car was always right behind her. On the third night, she woke up at 2 in the morning to the sound of her mother crying. Tanya thought Aisha was asleep, but through the thin wall she could hear every word. "Nobody will help us, Mom," Tanya whispered into the phone. "The school won't listen. The police won't listen. I can't protect her. What if something happens? What if I lose her?" Lying in the dark, Aisha stared at the ceiling and made a decision that no child should ever have to make. If no one was coming to help, she'd find her own protectors, and she knew exactly where to go. 3 weeks earlier, Tanya had taken her to Rosie's Diner, a cozy spot on Main Street for Saturday breakfast. That morning, Aisha had noticed a group of men sitting at the counter. They were impossible to miss. Huge men with beards and tattoos, leather vests stretched across broad shoulders. Their motorcycles parked outside, gleaming in the sunlight. Other customers avoided looking at them. Some whispered. They looked scary, dangerous, untouchable. But Aisha had watched quietly from her booth. She saw one of them, the biggest with a gray beard, hold the door open for an old woman with a walker. She saw him pay for her meal when she dropped her purse. She saw another man help a waitress carry a heavy tray. They looked like monsters, but they acted like heroes, and that stuck in her head. If everyone's scared of them, she'd thought, then maybe the bad people would be scared of them too. Now, in the cold, pre-dawn darkness, that memory became her plan. Wednesday morning, November 12th, 6:45 a.m. Tanya was in the shower, running late for her shift. Aisha slipped quietly out of bed. She was already dressed, shoes tied, backpack ready. She'd slept in her clothes the night before, just in case. Her small hands trembled as she zipped up her jacket and stepped outside. The air was cold, and her breath came out in quick white puffs. The street was empty. Every step echoed on the pavement. 4 blocks. That's all it was. Just 4 blocks from home to Rosie's Diner. But at that hour, it felt like crossing the world. Each block felt longer than the last. Her mind raced. What if they don't listen? What if they laugh? What if they're mean? But she kept walking, because the thought of going back to school alone was worse than anything else. When she reached Main Street, the diner sign flickered in the gray light. A neon Rosie's buzzing faintly, and parked outside, just like before, were the motorcycles. 8 of them, chrome and steel lined up neatly. The sight made her heart pound harder. She stood across the street, frozen. Through the window, she could see them inside. The same men, laughing over coffee and pancakes. For a moment, she almost turned back. Then she remembered the black car, the smile, the voice saying, "I know where you live." Aisha took a deep breath and crossed the street. Her knees felt weak, but she kept going. She pushed open the diner door, the bell chiming softly. Conversation stopped. Every head turned, and there she was, a tiny girl in a purple jacket, a dinosaur keychain dangling from her backpack, standing in a doorway full of giants. Aisha's voice barely worked, but somehow she found the words. She walked straight up to the biggest man, the one with the gray beard and the leather vest covered in patches. He looked down at her, surprised. She looked up at him with trembling lips and said the words that would change everything. "I need you to walk me to school. The bad people are trying to hurt me, and nobody else will help." The entire diner went silent. Coffee cups stopped midair. Forks froze. The air felt heavy. The big man, Jack Sullivan, a former Marine and the local chapter president of the Riverton Hells Angels, stared at this child in front of him and saw something he hadn't seen in years: fear, innocence, and an impossible kind of courage. He crouched down slowly until his eyes were level with hers. His voice softened. "Sweetheart," he said gently, "where's your mama?" "Does she know you're here?" Aisha shook her head, tears spilling now that she'd finally spoken. "She tried to help me," she whispered. "But the school said I was too sensitive. The police said it's kids being kids. But it's not. There's a man in a car. He knows where I live. I'm scared." Jack's expression changed. The confusion melted into something else, something fierce, protective and dangerous. Behind him, another man stood up. Marcus Patterson. Everyone called him Ghost, a retired Special Forces soldier built like a wall. He knelt beside Jack, lowering his massive frame until he wasn't towering over her. His voice rumbled like distant thunder. "Little one," he said, "we're going to help you, but we need you to tell us everything. Can you do that?" And she did. She told them everything: the bullying, the following, the black car, the man with the football sticker, the smile. She recited the license plate from memory, every digit etched into her mind from fear. When she finished, the room was silent again. Jack stood up slowly, his jaw tight. He looked at Marcus, then at the other bikers. Without saying a word, they all rose to their feet. Jack turned back toward the window, his reflection dark against the morning light. "Travis Morrison," he said finally. "Councilman Morrison's son." The name hit the room like a dropped weight. Everyone knew the Morrisons. Powerful family, untouchable. Complaints disappeared around them. Laws bent, but now they'd gone too far. Aisha didn't know it, but the man she was afraid of wasn't just some teenager. He was the son of the most powerful man in town, and the entire system had been protecting him. Jack looked back at Aisha, then at his brothers. "Get everyone," he said quietly. "Every chapter within 3 states. Every veteran you know. We're escorting this little girl to school." And in that moment, Aisha Johnson, a 7-year-old who had been failed by every system meant to protect her, found herself standing at the center of something unstoppable. She had no way of knowing that her act of bravery would ignite a movement, expose corruption, and change everything for an entire town. But that was coming. For now, she just looked up at the man with the gray beard, tears drying on her cheeks, as he gave her the first promise that actually meant something. "Don't worry, sweetheart," Jack said softly. "You're safe now. We'll take it from here." Outside, the first engines began to rumble, and that was the moment Riverton's quiet little town began to wake up. The moment Jack Sullivan stood up from that diner booth, the air inside Rosie's diner changed. The smell of coffee and bacon grease faded. Behind something heavier, a collective silence. That only comes before a storm. Aisha sat quietly at the counter, her small hands wrapped around a mug of hot chocolate Rosie had given her. She didn't understand the full gravity of what was happening, but she could feel it. Something was shifting in that room. These men, the ones everyone in town feared, were looking at her with something she hadn't seen in weeks: compassion. Not pity, not dismissal, but real concern. Jack walked to the end of the counter, pulling out his phone. His voice was low but firm, the kind of voice that made grown men listen. "Get everyone," he said again, this time to Marcus, who nodded and stepped outside to start making calls of his own. The rest of the bikers followed without hesitation. No one questioned it. No one laughed. They all understood what it meant. When a child came to you for help because she had nowhere else to go, you don't say no. Within minutes, The sound of motorcycle engines began echoing faintly in the distance. Calls were spreading fast, club to club, city to city. The Brotherhood network was alive again. Jack dialed the first number from memory. "Danny," he said when the line picked up. "Need you here. Child's in danger. School won't act. Cops won't act. Councilman's boy. We roll at 8:30. On the other end of the line, the answer came without hesitation. "We'll bring 20. Leave the lights on." Inside the diner, Aisha watched as the men moved like soldiers. Their leather vests creaked as they pulled on gloves, adjusted patches, and started their engines. The low, rhythmic thunder of motorcycles filled the morning air, blending with the hum of awakening streets. She looked out the window and saw her reflection. Tiny face, eyes wide, the faint outline of her fear still clinging to her. But for the first time, something else was there too. Safety. The kind of safety that comes when someone, bigger than your nightmares, stands between you and the world. At exactly 7:15, Tanya's car screeched into the diner parking lot. She had discovered the empty bed, the open front door, and nearly collapsed from panic. When she burst through the diner door, breathless, eyes wild, she froze at the sight before her. Aisha, safe, sitting on a stool, surrounded by towering men in leather vests. For a split second, her fear turned to anger. "What is this? What are you doing with my daughter?" she shouted. Jack stepped forward calmly, hands raised, voice steady. "Ma'am," he said, "your daughter came to us this morning. She walked here alone because no one else would listen. She told us everything, the bullying, the stalking, the man in the black car. We're going to fix it. But first, you need to breathe. She's safe now." Tanya's breath hitched. Tears filled her eyes as she ran to Aisha, scooping her into her arms. The girl buried her face in her mother's shoulder. "I'm sorry, Mommy," she whispered. "But I needed help." Tanya held her tighter, realizing through her tears that this small, trembling child had done something braver than most adults ever could. When she looked back at Jack and his men, her anger was gone. All she saw were protectors. Jack nodded slightly as if to promise. Nothing bad happens to her again. By 7:30, the calls had gone out to every chapter within 100 miles. From Pittsburgh, from Harrisburg, from small towns whose names didn't appear on most maps. The word was spreading. A child in Riverton needed protection. By 7:45, the first wave arrived, 5 bikes rumbling into the diner lot, chrome flashing in the cold sunlight. Then 10 more. Then 15. Rosie's Diner parking, lot filled with the sound of engines and the smell of exhaust. Neighbors began peeking out of windows. People walking dogs stopped to stare. Nobody knew exactly what was happening. But they knew one thing: something big was about to go down. Inside the diner, Jack and Marcus briefed the riders like they were preparing for a mission. "This isn't about scaring people," Jack said, voice steady, calm. "It's about protection. No chaos, no threats. We move as one. That girl walks to school surrounded by family." His words spread through the room like gospel. Heads nodded. Gloves tightened. These were men and women who had seen real darkness, and they knew exactly what kind of world could swallow a child whole if no one intervened. Tanya stood by the window holding Aisha's hand, still trying to process what she was seeing. Dozens of motorcycles lined up, riders forming ranks like soldiers. Some were veterans, others mechanics, fathers, grandfathers, mothers, each one with the same expression, quiet determination. She looked down at Aisha, who was staring out the window, eyes full of awe. The little girl wasn't shaking anymore. She wasn't shrinking into herself. She was standing taller. At 8 a.m., a light mist hung over the streets of Riverton. Jack walked outside, pulling a small leather vest from his bike's saddlebag. It was tiny, made years ago for a charity ride that never happened. He knelt beside Aisha, holding it up. "This is for you," he said softly. "It means you're one of us now. It means nobody touches you." Without answering to all of us, the words, embroidered on the back, read, "Protected by angels." Aisha touched the leather carefully, like it was something sacred. Jack helped her put it on. It fit perfectly over her purple jacket. When she turned around, Tanya had to look away for a moment. Tears blurred her eyes. She had spent weeks feeling powerless, watching her child disappear under fear. And now, standing in front of her, was that same little girl, but stronger, shielded, unbreakable. Jack put on his helmet and looked down at Aisha. "Ready to go to school?" he asked. She nodded. He lifted her up onto the motorcycle, sitting her in front of him where he could keep both arms around her. The leather was cool against her small hands. "Don't be scared of the noise," he said. "That's just the sound of angels waking up." At exactly 8:15, the engines roared to life. The sound rolled through the streets like thunder. Inside nearby houses, people opened curtains. On sidewalks, children on their way to school stopped and stared. One by one, the motorcycles pulled out of the parking lot, falling into perfect formation. At the very center of the convoy was Jack and Aisha, surrounded on all sides by riders, their headlights forming a protective circle. Tanya followed in her car just behind them, her hands gripping the steering wheel, her heart racing with pride and disbelief. The ride was slow, steady, deliberate. They didn't speed. They didn't weave through traffic. They moved like a living wall of chrome and steel. At intersections, cars pulled over. People came out of shops, phones in hand, recording the sight. The rumble of 200 engines echoed down every street. Flags mounted on bikes snapped in the breeze. American flags, Marine Corps banners, and patches from chapters across 3 states. To the people watching, it looked like a parade. To those who knew, it was something far deeper, an act of defiance against fear itself. As they rolled closer to Jefferson Elementary, the noise grew louder. Parents dropping off their children turned toward the sound, confusion spreading across their faces. The principal stepped out of the building, half awake, holding a coffee mug, and then froze. The ground trembled. The roar of engines surrounded the school as the first bikes pulled into the lot, followed by more and then more. 200 motorcycles forming a wall around the school building. And at the center, Aisha climbed down from Jack's bike, her small hand still in his. The bullies who had once cornered her in hallways were standing by the basketball court, mouths hanging open, eyes wide with disbelief. Aisha looked at them but didn't flinch. Not this time. She stood tall in her little leather vest, the patch gleaming in the sunlight. Tanya stood beside her. Marcus and 2 other bikers flanked them like guardians. Jack looked down at the girl who had started it all and smiled. "You did good, kid," he said quietly. "You brought the whole town to its feet." Across the street, a black car idled, engine running. Travis Morrison was watching. He had planned to follow her again that morning, maybe scare her a little more, remind her who had control. But when he saw what was waiting for him, 200 bikers surrounding the school, police blocking the road, reporters lifting cameras, his heart began to pound. He gripped the steering wheel tighter, his mind racing. For the first time in his life, Travis felt something he wasn't used to. Fear. He tried to reverse, but 3 motorcycles pulled in behind his car, blocking his path. Their engines were low and steady. No threats, no shouting, just presence. Jack walked slowly across the street toward him, each step measured, deliberate. Travis lowered his window before Jack even knocked. The older man leaned down, resting one arm on the door. "Travis," he said calmly, his eyes hard, "I know who you are. I know what you've been doing. You've got one chance to make it right. You ever come near that girl again and you won't be dealing with cops. You'll be dealing with us, and we don't forget. Understood?" Travis's face went pale. He nodded quickly, unable to speak. Jack straightened up, gave one nod, and turned back toward the school. The riders behind Travis's car moved aside. Travis didn't wait another second. He hit the gas and disappeared down the road. Back at the school, something unexpected began to happen. Parents started clapping. Teachers stepped out, their eyes wide but full of something like gratitude. Kids cheered. For once, the most vulnerable child in that school wasn't walking alone. She was walking through a corridor of protection, an army of men and women who had answered her call without hesitation. The moment Aisha stepped onto the school steps, flanked by her protectors, every bully in that yard understood exactly what had changed. And while most people thought that morning's spectacle would be the end of it, for Riverton, it was only the beginning. Because what happened next would expose secrets buried deep within the town's system. It would uncover corruption, fear, and silence, and all of it would start with the roar of 200 engines and one little girl's courage. That night, the videos hit social media. Parents recorded the entire scene, the bikers surrounding the school, Aisha climbing off the motorcycle, the principal's pale face as cameras rolled. By evening, every local news station was replaying the footage. "Small-town bikers escort girl to school after bullying," the headline read. But what nobody realized yet was that this story wasn't just about a child and her protectors. It was about a system that had ignored the vulnerable for too long, and a community that was finally waking up. Inside his office that evening, Councilman Robert Morrison watched the broadcast, his jaw tightening. His son's name was beginning to circulate. Reporters were asking questions. Phone calls were being made. Morrison had built his entire political career on control over the town, the police, even the school board. But now, control was slipping. His phone rang again. A familiar voice on the line said quietly, "The FBI wants to talk." Morrison didn't know it yet, but his empire was about to crumble because the girl his family had tried to silence had just become the loudest voice in the state. And while Riverton slept that night, motorcycles still rumbled softly outside Jefferson Elementary, their headlights cutting through the fog, keeping watch. The angels weren't leaving, not yet. Not until every shadow in that town had been dragged into the light. That night, the town of Riverton didn't sleep. The sound of motorcycles still echoed faintly through the streets, a low protective hum beneath the silence. Rosie's Diner stayed open past midnight, coffee constantly brewing for the riders who refused to leave until they were sure Aisha was safe. Jack Sullivan stood by the window, watching the empty road, arms crossed, jaw tight. Marcus "Ghost" Patterson sat at the counter, sipping coffee that had long gone cold. Neither man said a word for a long time. There was nothing left to say. The system had failed. The town had turned a blind eye, and it had taken a 7-year-old to force it to see again. Across town, in a big brick house on a hill, Councilman Roberts. Morrison sat in his home office staring at the news replaying on his TV. Over and over, the footage showed Aisha stepping off the motorcycle, her little leather vest gleaming in the morning sun, surrounded by bikers, teachers, parents, and cameras. It was everywhere. "Community rallies to protect bullied girl," the anchor said. But Morrison heard something else, the whisper that traveled. Beneath the surface of every word, his name, his family's name, his son's name. It was spreading like wildfire. He muted the TV and pressed his fingers to his temples. For years, Morrison had buried his son's mistakes under a blanket of influence and favors. A complaint here, a bribe there, a favor called in with the police chief, a warning to a teacher, a threat to a parent. He had kept the family image clean, the campaign donors happy, the press quiet. But now everything was unraveling. By morning, news vans lined the street outside Jefferson Elementary. Reporters with microphones stood on the sidewalk waiting. Parents gave interviews. One mother spoke tearfully about her own child who had been bullied by the Morrison boys. Another father described being threatened by the principal after filing a complaint. One by one, the stories poured out, and the web that Morrison had spun for years began to tear. Inside the school, Principal Hicks tried to act calm, but his face betrayed him. He stood at the office window watching the growing crowd outside. His hands shook as he reached for the phone, dialing Morrison's number. "They're here," he whispered. "The media. Parents are talking. It's bad, Robert. It's very bad." Morrison's voice on the other end was cold. "Keep your mouth shut," he snapped. "Say nothing. Destroy anything in your office with my name on it. Do you understand me?" Hicks nodded, sweat trickling down his forehead. "I'll handle it." But he wouldn't, because outside, the truth was already loose, and once it escapes, truth doesn't go back into hiding. At 9:45 a.m., an unmarked black sedan pulled into the school parking lot. A woman stepped out, dark suit, hair tied back, badge on her hip. She looked like she had seen more than her fair share of men like Robert Morrison. Her name was Special Agent Victoria Chun, FBI. She had served with Jack Sullivan 15 years ago in the Marines, back when both of them were younger, harder, and full of faith in the system. Jack had lost that faith long ago. She hadn't, at least not completely. When she saw him standing outside the school, surrounded by bikers, she smiled faintly. "You always did make an entrance, Sullivan," she said. Jack shrugged. "You always did show up when the fires got hottest." They shook hands. "Like old soldiers." Then Jack gestured toward Aisha. who was sitting on the steps eating a granola bar, her mother beside her. "That's her," he said. "The one who started it all." Victoria followed his gaze. The little girl looked so small, so ordinary, yet there was something unshakable about her posture, even as she swung her legs idly and stared out at the reporters. Victoria felt a chill. "She's the reason?" Jack nodded. "She's the reason." Victoria opened her briefcase and pulled out a thin file. "We've been investigating Councilman Morrison for 8 months, she said. "Corruption, bribery, obstruction. But there's more. We found patterns of reports, assaults, harassment, stalking, all involving his son. All complaints that disappeared after being filed through this school." She looked up. "Every one of them signed off by Principal Hicks." Jack's jaw tightened. "You can nail him?" "We can now," she replied. "Thanks to your little guardian angel." Across the street, more motorcycles rolled in. Some riders were local, others from neighboring states. They didn't come to threaten. They came to watch, to stand silently as witnesses, while the system that failed a child finally faced itself. Their leather vests gleamed in the sun, patches from every corner of the country catching the light. People driving by slowed down, rolled down windows, and waved. For the first time in a long time, Riverton wasn't afraid of them. By noon, Agent Chun had warrants signed. Police officers, real ones, the kind who hadn't been bought, walked into Jefferson Elementary and straight into the principal's office. Hicks was halfway through shredding papers when they opened the door. "Principal Hicks," one of them said, "you're under arrest for obstruction of justice and tampering with evidence." His hands froze mid-motion. The papers fluttered to the floor like falling leaves. Outside, parents clapped as he was escorted out. At 12:30 p.m., another team of agents drove to Morrison's home. Reporters followed. The councilman met them at the door in a crisp suit. His smile brittle, his voice rehearsed. "This is outrageous," he said. "A political stunt. You have no proof of anything." But when the agents handed him the warrant, his confidence faltered. His wife stood behind him, pale and silent. And on the staircase, halfway up, his son Travis watched in stunned disbelief. When they cuffed him too for stalking and harassment of a minor, he didn't fight. He just stared at the floor, face drained of color. That night, the story went national. Every major network carried it. Councilman arrested in small-town corruption. Scandal. Beneath the headlines was a photo, Aisha, sitting on a motorcycle, smiling shyly at the camera, the words "protected by angels" visible on her vest. The world couldn't get enough of it. By the next morning, millions had seen it. Hashtags spread, "Ride for Aisha," "Protect the Kids," "Angels on Wheels." In Riverton, something beautiful began to happen. The next day, when Aisha arrived at school, this time walking beside her mom, no bikers needed, other kids ran up to her. Some hugged her. Some asked if the bikers would come again. She smiled shyly, but she wasn't afraid anymore. Tyler and Jake, the bullies who once ruled the hallways, avoided her completely. Their parents had been forced to publicly apologize. The principal was gone. The corridors that once echoed with taunts now carried whispers of respect. That afternoon, Aisha drew a picture in art class. It showed motorcycles and smiling faces. And at the top, in crooked 7-year-old handwriting, she wrote, "Me and the Angels." She gave it to Jack the next morning when he stopped by the school gates. He took it carefully, folding it once and tucking it inside his jacket like it was something precious. "Thank you, sweetheart," he said. "But I think you got that backwards. We were just riding. You're the real angel." Over the next few weeks, more stories surfaced. Other parents came forward about bullying that had been ignored. Other children admitted they'd been too scared to tell. But now they weren't alone. The bikers stayed visible. Every morning, 2 or 3 of them parked near the school, waving to kids, making sure they felt safe. It wasn't about intimidation anymore. It was about presence. About showing that protection could be loud, unapologetic, and compassionate all at once. News crews came back to film updates. They interviewed Tanya, who stood outside Rosie's diner holding her daughter's hand. "They gave me my little girl back," she said softly, tears in her eyes. "These men everyone said to fear, they protected her heart, not just her body." The video went viral again. Donations poured into a new nonprofit. Jack and Marcus had started the Angel Project, an organization dedicated to protecting children from bullying and abuse, connecting biker chapters across the country. Within months, similar rides were happening everywhere: Texas, Arizona, Ohio. In one video from Chicago, a line of bikers escorted a group of elementary school students through downtown traffic. The caption read, "Inspired by Aisha." In Riverton, spring came quietly. The snow melted from the hills. The streets warmed under sunlight, and the town that had once been asleep was finally awake. Tanya went back to working regular shifts. Aisha joined the art club, started smiling more, sleeping better. Every now and then, she and her mom still visited Rosie's Diner on Saturdays. The same booth, the same pancakes. Sometimes Jack and Marcus were there too, drinking coffee, telling stories. They called her Sunshine. She called Jack Papa Bear. It stuck. One Saturday in May, the mayor held a ceremony in the town square. Jack stood awkwardly in front of a microphone while the mayor read a speech about courage, compassion, and community. When she handed him the key to the city, he shook his head. "I think you've got the wrong person," he said, smiling faintly. Then he turned, knelt beside Aisha, and pressed the key into her small hands. "This belongs to you, little one. You started all of this." The crowd clapped. Aisha's face turned red, but she grinned anyway. Tanya cried quietly beside her. The moment became a photograph on the front page of the paper the next morning. The girl who woke a town. Later that year, the school held an assembly about kindness and courage. Aisha stood at the podium, so small they had to lower the microphone. The gym fell silent as she spoke. Her voice was soft but steady. "My name is Aisha Johnson," she said. "I was scared once, but I learned something. Being scared doesn't mean you're weak. Asking for help doesn't mean you're alone. It means you're brave. If you're scared, tell someone. Keep telling them until someone listens. Because there are good people everywhere. You just have to find them." The applause was deafening. Teachers wiped tears from their eyes. Kids cheered. And in the back row, 20 leather-clad riders stood quietly, arms crossed, sunglasses hiding wet eyes. Jack looked down at the little girl on the stage and thought about how strange the world could be, how a child's courage could do what politics and power never could. She had done more than just save herself. She had reminded everyone that heroes don't always wear badges or suits or capes. Sometimes they wear leather. Sometimes they roar on 2 wheels. And sometimes they're only 7 years old, with a dinosaur keychain on their backpack and a heart, brave enough to change the world. The story of Aisha Johnson spread far beyond Riverton. But in that small town, it never became legend. It became memory. Every morning when kids walked to school, they'd pass by the mural painted on the side of Rosie's Diner, a small girl in a purple jacket sitting on a motorcycle, surrounded by wings of light. Underneath it, 3 words: protected by angels. And every time the wind carried the distant echo of motorcycle engines. Through the valley, people smiled, because they knew. Somewhere out there, someone was still riding. Someone was still watching. Someone was still answering when a child cried for help. Because of Aisha. Because of the girl who asked the angels for help.